Imagine this. You're sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, palms sweating as you prepare for the most important presentation of your career. Your heart pounds so loudly you're convinced everyone can hear it echoing off the polished marble floors. Or maybe you're on a first date in a trendy Chicago rooftop restaurant, watching your carefully planned conversation crumble as anxiety hijacks your voice, leaving you stumbling over words like a teenager again. Perhaps you're stuck in Los Angeles traffic, your blood pressure spiking as another driver cuts you off, and you feel that familiar surge of rage threatening to explode into road rage. We've all been there, those moments when our emotions grab the steering wheel of our lives, turning us into passengers in our own bodies. 1 minute we're composed, rational adults navigating the complexities of modern American life, and the next we're at the mercy of sweaty palms, racing hearts, and thoughts spinning faster than a Times Square ticker. It's as if our carefully constructed professional personas dissolve the moment stress enters the equation, leaving us feeling powerless against the tsunami of our own emotional reactions. But what if I told you that over 2,000 years ago, long before terms like anxiety disorder or emotional intelligence entered our vocabulary, some of history's most brilliant minds had already cracked the code on mastering these exact challenges? The ancient Stoics, philosophers, emperors, and freed slaves alike developed a sophisticated system for maintaining inner calm while navigating life's most turbulent storms. These weren't ivory tower academics theorizing about human nature from comfortable libraries. Marcus Aurelius commanded Roman legions while managing a plague-ravaged empire. Epictetus survived slavery and physical disability. Seneca navigated the treacherous politics of imperial Rome while building vast wealth and influence. They lived through wars, political upheavals, personal tragedies, and social chaos that would challenge even our most resilient modern leaders. Yet they discovered something profound. The secret to thriving under pressure isn't about avoiding life's difficulties or suppressing our natural emotional responses. Instead, it's about understanding a fundamental truth that can transform how we experience every challenging moment. We may not control what happens to us, but we absolutely control what happens within us. Today, we're embarking on a journey that bridges 20 centuries, connecting ancient wisdom with cutting-edge neuroscience, timeless philosophy with practical daily habits. We're going to explore how Stoic principles can transform your relationship with stress, anxiety, anger, and overwhelm, not by making you emotionless, but by making you emotionally intelligent in ways that will revolutionize your personal relationships, professional success, and inner peace. If you've ever felt like your emotions were running your life instead of serving it, if you've wondered how some people maintain grace under pressure while others crumble, or if you're simply ready to stop being a victim of your own reactions, then this exploration of Stoic wisdom is exactly what you need. The insights we're about to uncover aren't just philosophical concepts. They're practical tools that have helped millions of people across centuries build lives of purpose, resilience, and authentic strength. Habit 1: the discipline of perception, understanding your inner signals. Sarah, a marketing executive in downtown Seattle, was presenting quarterly results to her company's board when the CEO suddenly interrupted with a sharp question about declining metrics. In that instant, her body launched into full alert mode, heart racing, face flushing, mind going blank. She felt like she was drowning in her own stress response, completely hijacked by emotions she couldn't control. This scenario plays out thousands of times daily across American cities, from Wall Street boardrooms to Silicon Valley startups, leaving professionals feeling powerless against their own internal reactions. The ancient Stoics understood something crucial about these moments that modern neuroscience is only now validating. Our emotions aren't our enemies, but they're also not our masters. Epictetus, who knew firsthand about powerlessness as a former slave, taught that wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants. This principle extends beyond material desires to our relationship with our emotional responses. True wealth lies not in having no emotions, but in not being enslaved by them. Think of your emotions as that well-intentioned friend who always means to help but sometimes doesn't know when to step back. When you're running late for an important meeting and hit every red light in downtown Chicago, your anxiety isn't trying to sabotage you, it's attempting to help by alerting you to potential consequences. When a colleague takes credit for your work during a presentation, your anger isn't inherently destructive. It's signaling that something important to you, recognition, fairness, respect, has been threatened. The problem isn't the emotion itself, it's that these internal alarm systems were designed for a world vastly different from our current reality. Your brain's threat detection system evolved when humans faced immediate physical dangers, predators, natural disasters, tribal conflicts. But in modern New York City, this same system treats a critical email from your boss with the same urgency as a charging lion. The amygdala, your brain's alarm center, doesn't distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a passive-aggressive text from your ex-partner. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his personal journal while managing an empire under siege, observed, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This wasn't philosophical speculation, but hard-won wisdom from someone who faced assassination attempts, plague outbreaks, and military campaigns. He understood that the first step toward emotional mastery is recognizing the difference between the signal and the noise. Here's where the Stoic discipline of perception becomes transformative. Emotions are informational, not directional. They're like the warning lights on your car's dashboard, valuable data about what's happening, but not instructions about what you must do next. When your check engine light comes on, you don't immediately abandon your car on the highway. You acknowledge the information, assess the situation, and decide on the most rational response based on your circumstances and priorities. Consider Marcus, a financial advisor in Boston who noticed his jaw clenching and shoulders tensing every time his phone buzzed with client messages during market volatility. Instead of trying to suppress these physical responses, he began treating them as early warning signals. "My body is telling me that I'm entering a high-stress situation," he learned to think. "This tension is information, not instruction. I can acknowledge it without letting it drive my responses to clients." The Stoics called this practice prosoke, a kind of continuous mindful attention to our internal states. It's not about achieving some Zen-like emotional flatness, but about developing what we might call emotional intelligence. You begin to recognize your personal emotional signatures, the way your breathing changes when frustration builds, how your thoughts race when anxiety spikes, the physical sensations that accompany different emotional states. Seneca, who navigated the dangerous waters of Roman politics while building immense wealth, practiced a form of emotional meteorology. He learned to read the weather patterns of his inner world. "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end," he wrote, recognizing that emotional states, like weather systems, are temporary and changeable. The key is developing the skill to observe these internal weather patterns without being swept away by every emotional storm. This discipline of perception transforms your relationship with challenging emotions from reactive to responsive. Instead of being ambushed by anger, anxiety, or frustration, you begin to see them coming. You notice the early warning signs, the slight quickening of your pulse, the subtle shift in your thinking patterns, the physical tension beginning to build. This awareness creates what Viktor Frankl would later call the space between stimulus and response, that crucial moment where your freedom and power reside. The goal isn't to become emotionally numb or to eliminate all uncomfortable feelings. Rather, it's to develop the sophisticated ability to receive emotional information without being controlled by it, to honor your feelings while maintaining your capacity for rational choice. Habit 2. The Dichotomy of Judgment, transforming your inner narrative. James, a software engineer in Austin, was seething with rage after his project manager publicly criticized his code during a team meeting. "She's deliberately trying to humiliate me," he thought, his anger building with each replay of the scene in his mind. "This is a personal attack on my competence." But was it really? Or was James creating his own emotional storm through the story he was telling himself about what had happened? The Stoics discovered something revolutionary about human psychology that modern cognitive behavioral therapy has validated. Our emotions don't come directly from events themselves, but from our judgments and interpretations of those events. Epictetus, who understood oppression intimately as a former slave, taught this principle with crystal clarity. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things. This isn't philosophical wordplay, it's a practical key to emotional freedom that can transform how you experience every challenging situation in your life. Consider the difference between these two interpretations of the same workplace scenario. Sarah receives feedback that her presentation needs major revisions. Story 1. My boss thinks I'm incompetent. I'm probably going to get fired. I'm a failure at this job. Story 2. My boss is invested enough in this project to give detailed feedback. This is an opportunity to improve my work and demonstrate my ability to incorporate constructive criticism. Same event, completely different emotional outcomes based entirely on the narrative framework Sarah chooses to apply. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his Meditations while commanding armies and managing a plague-ravaged empire, repeatedly reminded himself of this principle: confine yourself to the present. He understood that most of our emotional suffering comes not from what's actually happening, but from the stories we construct about what might happen, what should have happened, or what others must be thinking. When facing military setbacks, political intrigue, and personal losses, he practiced separating facts from interpretations, events from the meanings he assigned to them. This practice becomes especially powerful when dealing with other people's behavior. Take Rachel, a marketing director in Denver, who was furious when her colleague consistently arrived late to meetings. Her initial judgment: he doesn't respect my time or this team. He thinks he's more important than everyone else. But when she applied Stoic principles, she began exploring alternative interpretations. Maybe he's struggling with childcare logistics. Perhaps he's overwhelmed with his current workload. It's possible he doesn't realize how his lateness affects others. The Stoics called this practice premeditatio malorum, not dwelling on worst-case scenarios, but mentally rehearsing how to maintain equanimity when facing difficulties. Seneca, who survived exile, political persecution, and eventually execution, regularly practiced imagining losses and setbacks. "What is grief but an opinion?" he wrote, not to minimize genuine sorrow, but to highlight how our interpretations amplify or diminish our emotional responses to life's inevitable challenges. This doesn't mean adopting naive optimism or denying legitimate problems. When Michael, a restaurant owner in Miami, faced declining sales during economic uncertainty, Stoic judgment didn't mean pretending everything was fine. Instead, it meant distinguishing between productive and unproductive interpretations. Unproductive: the economy is destroying my business. I'm helpless against these forces. Productive: Economic conditions are challenging and I need to adapt my business model. This situation demands creativity and strategic thinking. The power of this practice lies in recognizing that between every event and your emotional response stands an interpretation, and that interpretation is entirely within your control. Chrysippus, the third head of the Stoic school, used the analogy of a cylinder rolling down a hill. The hill provides the initial push, but the cylinder's shape determines how it rolls. External events provide the initial stimulus, but your judgments determine your emotional trajectory. Consider how this applies to modern social media interactions. When someone doesn't respond to your text message, you can choose between interpretations. They're ignoring me because they don't value our relationship versus they're probably busy, or their phone died, or they saw it but got distracted. The facts are identical, no response received. But your emotional experience depends entirely on which story you choose to believe. Epictetus taught his students to constantly ask themselves, is this within my control or outside my control? When it comes to our judgments and interpretations, the answer is always within my control. You cannot control whether your boss gives you feedback, whether your colleague arrives on time, or whether someone responds to your message. But you have absolute sovereignty over the meaning you assign to these events. This practice requires vigilance and honesty. Our initial interpretations often feel like facts because they arise so quickly and automatically. The Stoic discipline involves catching these automatic judgments and asking, is this the only possible interpretation? What other stories could explain this situation? Which interpretation serves my well-being and helps me respond more effectively? Through this discipline of judgment, you begin to see how much of your emotional suffering is self-created through the stories you tell yourself about reality. Habit 3. The sacred space of choice, claiming your inner freedom. Lisa, a financial analyst in Manhattan, felt her blood pressure spike as her subway train ground to a halt between stations during her morning commute. The automated announcement crackled, "We're being held momentarily by train traffic ahead." Around her, passengers began sighing, checking phones frantically, and muttering complaints. Lisa felt that familiar surge of frustration building. She had an important client presentation in 30 minutes, and now she was trapped underground with no control over when the train would move. But then she remembered something profound. While she couldn't control the train, she could absolutely control what happened in the next few moments of her life. This is the essence of what Viktor Frankl would later call the last of human freedoms, and what the Stoics understood as our most sacred possession, the space between stimulus and response. In that space, sometimes lasting mere seconds, sometimes stretching into hours, lies our power to choose our response to any situation. This isn't just philosophical theory, it's the practical foundation of human dignity and personal agency. Marcus Aurelius, facing the immense pressures of ruling an empire while dealing with personal tragedies including the loss of multiple children, wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never any need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control. These things are not asking to be judged by you. Leave them alone." This wasn't the advice of someone living in peaceful isolation, but the hard-won wisdom of a leader making life and death decisions while managing his own grief and stress. Think of life as an intricate dance where events come at you in rapid succession: a critical email from your boss, a friend's disappointing behavior, unexpected financial pressure, a family member's health crisis. Your emotions respond to these events like a skilled dance partner, moving quickly and automatically. But here's what most people miss: you are the choreographer of this dance. You decide which steps to take next, how to move with, around, or away from each emotional impulse. Consider David, an emergency room physician in Phoenix, who faces life and death decisions while managing his own stress responses. When a trauma patient arrives, his adrenaline spikes automatically. That's beyond his control. But in the crucial moments that follow, he has complete authority over his next actions. Does he let the adrenaline fuel precise, focused medical intervention, or does he allow it to create panic and clouded judgment? The stimulus trauma patient is the same, but his response determines both his effectiveness and his well-being. The Stoics called this practice prosoc, a continuous mindful attention to the present moment that allows us to recognize our choices as they arise. Epictetus, who knew physical powerlessness intimately due to his disability and former enslavement, discovered that this inner freedom was unassailable. No one can hurt you without your permission. This wasn't naive optimism, but recognition that others can affect your circumstances, but only you can determine your response to those circumstances. This principle transforms how we handle interpersonal conflicts. When Jennifer, a marketing manager in Seattle, received a harsh email from a colleague questioning her project timeline, her initial impulse was to fire back an equally sharp response. But she recognized the sacred space opening before her. She could choose to escalate the conflict through immediate reaction, or she could pause and consider, what response would align with my values and professional goals? How can I address the legitimate concerns while maintaining the working relationship? Seneca, who navigated the treacherous politics of imperial Rome while building vast wealth, practiced expanding the space through daily reflection. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end, he wrote, recognizing that each moment of choice represents both the end of automatic reaction and the beginning of conscious response. He would deliberately pause before important decisions, asking himself, is this response driven by emotion or by reason? Does this choice reflect who I want to be? The practical application involves developing what we might call choice awareness, the ability to recognize when you're standing in that sacred space between stimulus and response. Physical sensations often signal these moments: the quickening of your pulse when someone cuts you off in Los Angeles traffic, the tightness in your chest when receiving unexpected criticism, the flutter of anxiety before a difficult conversation. These bodily signals become invitations to pause and ask, what are my options here? What would my best self do in this situation? Which response will I be proud of tomorrow? This isn't about suppressing your initial emotional reaction. That first flash of anger, fear, or disappointment is often automatic and uncontrollable. But what follows that initial reaction is entirely within your domain. The goal isn't to eliminate all emotional responses or to become some kind of robotic decision maker. Rather, it's to develop the sophisticated ability to feel your emotions fully while maintaining your capacity for rational choice. You can acknowledge your anger while choosing not to lash out. You can feel your anxiety while still taking productive action. You can experience disappointment while maintaining perspective and hope. This sacred space of choice is where your character is forged and your freedom is exercised regardless of external circumstances. Habit 4. The Arsenal of Virtue: Practical Techniques for Rational Action. When Amanda, a project manager at a tech startup in San Francisco, walked into the Monday morning meeting to discover that her team's 3-month project had been canceled without warning, her first instinct was to explode. Her heart raced, her face flushed, and she felt the familiar surge of indignation rising in her chest. But instead of launching into an angry tirade about poor communication and wasted effort, she did something that surprised everyone in the room. She paused, took a slow breath, and said, I need a moment to process this information before we discuss next steps. That pause transformed what could have been a career-damaging outburst into a demonstration of professional leadership. This is the power of the first technique in the Stoic arsenal, the strategic pause. Seneca, who survived the volatile politics of Nero's court, understood that every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. The pause represents the end of automatic reaction and the beginning of conscious choice. It's not about suppressing your emotions, but about creating space for your rational mind to engage before your emotional impulses take control. The pause works because it interrupts the neurological pathway between emotional trigger and behavioral response. When you feel that surge of anger, anxiety, or frustration, imagine you're a skilled surgeon who has just been handed a scalpel. You don't immediately start cutting. You pause, assess the situation, and then make precise, intentional movements. Dr. Martinez, an emergency physician in Houston, practices this daily. When a trauma patient arrives, my adrenaline spikes automatically. But I've trained myself to take one conscious breath before I act. That breath is the difference between panic and precision. The second technique is cognitive reframing, the art of shifting your perspective to see situations through different lenses. Marcus Aurelius mastered this practice while dealing with betrayals, military setbacks, and personal losses. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present, meaning focus on what's actually happening rather than the stories you're creating about what it means." When stuck in Chicago traffic, instead of thinking, "This always happens to me, I have terrible luck," you might reframe it as, "This gives me unexpected time to listen to that podcast I've been meaning to catch up on." Consider how Rebecca, a real estate agent in Miami, transformed her experience with difficult clients. Instead of viewing demanding customers as personal attacks on her competence, she reframed them as people under stress making one of the biggest financial decisions of their lives. When someone gets emotional about a house inspection, she explains, "I remind myself that they're not angry at me, they're anxious about their future." This perspective helps me respond with empathy instead of defensiveness. The third technique involves values-based decision-making, which Epictetus championed through his teaching. Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few wants. This principle extends beyond material desires to our decision-making process. Instead of asking, "What do I feel like doing?" or "What would be easiest?" the Stoic asks, "What would align with my deepest values, and what would the person I aspire to be do in this situation?" James, a middle school teacher in Portland, uses this technique when dealing with disruptive students. Instead of reacting with frustration or punishment, he asks himself, "What response would align with my values of patience, growth, and education?" This often leads him to approach behavioral issues as teaching opportunities rather than disciplinary problems. When I remember that my core value is helping kids develop into their best selves, my responses become more creative and effective. The fourth technique is emotional acceptance, not resignation, but acknowledgement. Chrysippus, the third head of the Stoic school, taught that fighting against emotions is like trying to stop a river with your bare hands. Instead, you acknowledge the emotion's presence without letting it dictate your actions. "I notice I'm feeling angry right now, and that's understandable given the situation. Now, what's the most constructive way to address this issue?" Lisa, a marketing director in Denver, practices this when receiving criticism from clients. "I used to get defensive immediately when someone questioned my work. Now I say to myself, I'm feeling defensive right now, which makes sense because I care about my work quality. Let me listen to understand what they're actually concerned about." This acceptance creates space for productive dialogue instead of emotional combat. These techniques work synergistically. The pause creates space, reframing provides perspective, values-based thinking offers direction, and emotional acceptance prevents internal warfare. Together, they form what Seneca called the citadel of the self, an inner fortress that remains stable regardless of external storms. The key to mastering these techniques is consistent practice in low-stakes situations. Don't wait for a major crisis to try pausing or reframing. Practice when you're mildly annoyed by slow internet, slightly frustrated by a long grocery line, or moderately disappointed by changed plans. These smaller moments become training grounds for the larger challenges that inevitably arise in life. Habit 5. The fruits of wisdom. How rational living transforms your world. When Marcus Chun started applying Stoic principles to his role as a senior software architect in Silicon Valley, he never expected the transformation to extend far beyond his own stress levels. But 6 months later, his colleagues began seeking him out during crises. His team's productivity had improved dramatically, and his marriage had grown stronger than it had been in years. The ripple effects of choosing rational responses over emotional reactions had fundamentally changed not just his inner world, but the entire ecosystem of relationships and responsibilities surrounding him. This is the profound promise of Stoic practice. When you master your own responses, you don't just improve your personal well-being, you become a stabilizing force that elevates everyone around you. Marcus Aurelius understood this principle deeply when he wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." He recognized that maintaining your own virtue and rationality in the face of others' poor behavior doesn't just protect your character. It often inspires others to rise to a higher standard. Consider the transformation in professional settings. Sarah, a project manager at a consulting firm in Boston, noticed that her team meetings became more productive once she stopped reacting defensively to criticism and started responding with genuine curiosity. "When someone questioned my timeline estimates, I used to get defensive and start justifying every detail," she explains. "Now I pause and ask, what specific concerns do you have about this approach?" That simple shift changed our entire team dynamic. People started bringing up issues earlier because they knew I'd listen rather than react. This professional composure creates what psychologists call a secure base. Others feel safe bringing problems, concerns, and ideas to you because they trust your response will be measured and constructive. David, an emergency department physician in Phoenix, discovered that his Stoic practice didn't just help him handle medical crises more effectively. It transformed how his entire team functioned under pressure. When I stopped letting stress make me irritable or impatient, my nurses and residents began communicating more openly about patient concerns. They weren't walking on eggshells anymore, which meant better patient care for everyone. The benefits extend powerfully into personal relationships. When you stop being controlled by every emotional impulse, you become someone others can depend on for stability and wisdom. Jennifer, a marketing executive in Chicago, found that her marriage improved dramatically once she applied Stoic principles to conflicts with her husband. "I used to escalate arguments by reacting to his tone or getting defensive about his complaints. Now I focus on understanding what he's actually trying to communicate. Our fights turned into conversations, and our conversations became much deeper." Epictetus, who understood powerlessness intimately through his experience as a slave, taught that true freedom comes from focusing on what we can control. This principle transforms intimate relationships because it eliminates the exhausting cycle of trying to change or control your partner's behavior. Instead, you focus on being the kind of person who responds with love, patience, and wisdom regardless of how others behave. The Stoic practice also builds remarkable personal resilience. Seneca, who faced exile, political persecution, and ultimately execution, wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." This perspective transforms how you experience setbacks and failures. Instead of being devastated by job losses, relationship endings, or financial difficulties, You begin to see these challenges as opportunities for growth and character development. Michael, a restaurant owner in Austin who survived the economic challenges of recent years, credits Stoic principles with not just saving his business, but making him a better leader. When revenues dropped 60% overnight, my first instinct was panic and anger at circumstances beyond my control. But I remembered Marcus Aurelius writing about focusing on what's in your power. I couldn't control the economic situation, but I could control how we adapted. That shift in focus led to innovations that made our business stronger than before. This resilience isn't about becoming emotionally numb or pretending difficulties don't matter. Rather, it's about developing what researchers call post-traumatic growth, the ability to emerge from challenges stronger, wiser, and more capable than before. The Stoics understood that our greatest trials often become our greatest teachers, but only if we approach them with the right mindset. Perhaps most importantly, Stoic practice develops profound self-awareness and emotional intelligence. When you're not constantly reacting to external circumstances, you have mental space to understand your own patterns, triggers, and growth areas. This self-knowledge then extends outward, improving your ability to understand and empathize with others' emotions and motivations. Lisa, a high school principal in Denver, found that her Stoic practice transformed how she handled difficult parents, struggling students, and bureaucratic pressures. When I stopped taking everything personally and started seeing challenging behaviors as information about what people need, I became much more effective at actually helping them. Parents who seemed angry were usually just worried about their kids. Students who acted out were often dealing with problems at home. My job became about solving problems rather than managing my own emotional reactions to them. The ultimate fruit of Stoic wisdom is what the Greeks called eudaimonia, often translated as happiness but better understood as human flourishing or living well. This isn't temporary pleasure or emotional highs, but the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your values, maintaining your integrity under pressure, and contributing positively to the world around you. Habit 6. The obstacles as the way, conquering inner resistance. Rachel, a marketing director in Seattle, had been trying to implement Stoic principles for 3 months when she faced her biggest test yet. During a crucial client presentation, her carefully prepared slides crashed, the backup system failed, and she found herself standing before 20 executives with nothing but her notes. Her heart pounded, her palms sweated, and every Stoic technique she'd practiced seemed to evaporate in the face of overwhelming panic. So much for emotional mastery, she thought bitterly as she stumbled through an improvised presentation. This moment of apparent failure actually marked the beginning of her real Stoic education, learning that the path to emotional mastery is paved with obstacles, setbacks, and moments of seeming defeat. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his Meditations while facing military campaigns, political intrigue, and personal tragedies, captured this truth perfectly: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This isn't philosophical optimism, but practical wisdom born from experience. Every challenge you face in developing emotional mastery isn't a sign that you're failing, it's the very mechanism through which mastery develops. The first major obstacle most people encounter is the sheer intensity and immediacy of emotional reactions. Your emotions don't care that you've been reading Stoic philosophy or practicing mindfulness. When your boss publicly criticizes your work, when your partner says something hurtful during an argument, or when you receive unexpected bad news, your emotional system responds with the same intensity it always has. This can feel deeply discouraging, like evidence that Stoic principles don't actually work in real-world situations. But Epictetus, who understood suffering intimately through his physical disability and years of slavery, taught his students to expect this challenge. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. The intensity of your emotional reactions isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. These moments of overwhelming emotion are your training ground, the gymnasium where emotional strength is built. Just as physical muscles grow stronger through resistance training, emotional resilience develops through successfully navigating intense emotional experiences. Consider James, a financial advisor in Boston who found himself losing his temper with difficult clients despite months of Stoic study. Instead of viewing these outbursts as failures, he began treating them as valuable data. Each time I reacted poorly, I could identify exactly where my practice broke down. Was it because I hadn't paused long enough? Had I failed to reframe the situation? Was I making it about my ego instead of serving the client? This analytical approach transformed his setbacks into stepping stones. The second major challenge is maintaining consistency across different contexts and stress levels. It's relatively easy to practice Stoic principles when you're calm, well-rested, and dealing with minor inconveniences. But what happens when you're sleep-deprived, facing a major deadline, and dealing with a family crisis simultaneously? This is where many people feel like Stoicism doesn't work in the real world. Seneca, who navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics while managing vast business interests, understood this challenge intimately. He practiced what he called premeditatio malorum, not pessimistic worry, but strategic mental preparation for difficulties. Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" This wasn't masochism but practical training for maintaining equanimity under pressure. The third obstacle is skepticism, both internal and external. Internally, you might doubt whether these ancient principles can really address modern problems like social media anxiety, workplace harassment, or financial stress. Externally, friends, family, or colleagues might view your commitment to emotional regulation as unnecessary, overly philosophical, or even weakness disguised as strength. Lisa, a high school teacher in Portland, faced this challenge when colleagues criticized her calm responses to disruptive students. They thought I was being too soft, that I should show more anger to maintain authority, she explains. But I had to trust that consistent, rational responses would be more effective than emotional reactions even when others questioned my approach. Her students' improved behavior over time validated her commitment to Stoic principles despite social pressure to abandon them. The fourth challenge involves integrating Stoic practices into the fast-paced, emotionally reactive culture of modern American life. Social media rewards immediate emotional responses. Workplace cultures often prioritize quick reactions over thoughtful responses, and entertainment media glorifies emotional drama over rational problem solving. Marcus, a software engineer in Austin, discovered that his commitment to pausing and reflecting before responding made him seem slow or indecisive in meetings where rapid-fire brainstorming was valued. I had to find ways to practice Stoic principles that fit within my company's culture. I learned to take micro-pauses, just a breath or two, that gave me time to choose my responses without seeming disengaged. The key to overcoming these obstacles lies in understanding that they're not impediments to your Stoic practice, they are your Stoic practice. Every moment of intense emotion, every lapse in consistency, every doubt about the effectiveness of these principles, every social pressure to abandon rational responses, these are the raw materials from which emotional mastery is forged. Habit 7. Philosophy in action, Stoicism in the arena of daily life. At 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, Jennifer's carefully orchestrated day began falling apart. Her presentation to the company's biggest client was scheduled for 10 a.m., but her laptop wouldn't start, the backup files were corrupted, and her team lead had just called in sick. Standing in the elevator of the Willis Tower, watching the floor numbers climb toward what felt like professional disaster, Jennifer faced a choice that would define not just her morning, but her entire approach to crisis management. This wasn't a philosophical thought experiment. This was Stoicism in the arena of real life, where ancient wisdom meets modern pressure. Marcus Aurelius, who commanded armies while managing a plague-ravaged empire, wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." In Jennifer's elevator, this principle became intensely practical. She could spend her energy catastrophizing about potential outcomes, replaying the morning's failures, or blaming others for the crisis. Or she could focus entirely on what remained within her control in the next 73 minutes. She chose the latter, using her phone to outline key talking points from memory, calling a colleague to borrow a laptop, and mentally preparing to deliver her presentation without slides if necessary. This is how Stoicism transforms from philosophical theory into practical power. When your carefully laid plans crumble, you don't waste energy mourning what should have been. You immediately redirect your attention to what can still be influenced. Jennifer's presentation, delivered with passion and deep knowledge rather than polished slides, impressed the client precisely because it demonstrated her ability to perform under pressure. Consider how this applies to workplace conflicts, one of the most common sources of daily stress for American professionals. David, a project manager at a tech startup in Austin, regularly dealt with a colleague who took credit for others' work and shifted blame when projects went poorly. David's initial approach was to fight fire with fire, calling out the behavior publicly, documenting every interaction, and building alliances against his colleague. But this strategy left David constantly angry, politically exhausted, and less effective at his actual job. Applying Stoic principles, David shifted his entire approach. Epictetus taught, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." David began treating his difficult colleague as a training partner in emotional discipline rather than an enemy to defeat. When credit was stolen, David calmly documented the facts without emotional commentary. When blame was shifted unfairly, he accepted responsibility for his actual contributions while refusing to absorb guilt for others' failures. This approach not only reduced David's stress but ultimately made his colleagues' poor behavior more obvious to management. Family relationships present another crucial arena for Stoic practice. Sarah, a marketing executive in Denver, found her Sunday dinners with extended family becoming sources of dread rather than connection. Political arguments, passive-aggressive comments about her career choices, and old family dynamics triggered reactions that left her feeling drained and guilty. Traditional advice suggested setting boundaries or limiting contact, but Stoicism offered a different approach. Seneca, who navigated complex family relationships while managing vast wealth and political responsibilities, wrote, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." Sarah began treating family gatherings as opportunities to practice unconditional love while maintaining her own emotional equilibrium. When her uncle made disparaging comments about her profession, instead of defending or attacking, she responded with genuine curiosity. What experiences shaped that perspective? This approach transformed confrontations into conversations and gradually shifted the entire family dynamic. Personal health and self-discipline provide another powerful arena for Stoic application. Michael, a restaurant owner in Miami, struggled with maintaining healthy habits despite knowing their importance. Late nights at the restaurant, stress eating, and irregular sleep patterns had become his norm. Traditional willpower-based approaches failed because they relied on feeling motivated, and motivation fluctuated with his stress levels. Stoic discipline operates differently. Instead of waiting to feel like exercising or eating well, Michael began treating these choices as expressions of his values rather than responses to his feelings. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Michael applied this by asking himself, what would someone who values long-term health do in this situation, regardless of how he felt in the moment? This values-based approach proved more sustainable than emotion-dependent motivation. Financial stress presents another common testing ground for Stoic principles. Lisa, a freelance graphic designer in Portland, experienced the feast or famine cycle typical of creative professionals. During lean periods, anxiety about money would consume her mental energy, making it harder to focus on finding new clients or producing quality work. During busy periods, she'd overspend out of relief, creating cycles of financial instability. Stoicism taught Lisa to separate her emotional reactions to financial fluctuations from her practical responses to them. Chrysippus, the third head of the Stoic school, emphasized that external circumstances don't determine our well-being, our responses to them do. Lisa began treating financial ups and downs as information rather than emergencies. Low-income months became signals to increase marketing efforts and reduce expenses, not reasons for panic. High-income months became opportunities to build reserves, not justifications for lifestyle inflation. These real-world applications reveal Stoicism's true power. It's not about becoming emotionally numb or passively accepting poor treatment. Rather, it's about maintaining your agency and effectiveness regardless of external circumstances, responding to life's challenges with wisdom rather than reactivity. Habit 8. Ancient wisdom meets modern science. The validated path. Dr. Sarah Chun, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, spent years studying the brain mechanisms behind emotional regulation before discovering that ancient Stoic philosophers had intuitively understood principles that modern science was only beginning to validate. When I first read Marcus Aurelius describing the space between stimulus and response, she explains, I realized he was describing what we now call prefrontal cortex override of limbic system responses. The Stoics had mapped the neural pathways of emotional mastery 2,000 years before we had the technology to see them. This convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science isn't coincidental. It reveals that Stoic principles align with fundamental truths about how human brains actually function. Contemporary research in neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral science provides compelling evidence that the techniques practiced by Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca create measurable changes in brain structure and function that enhance emotional resilience, decision-making capacity, and overall well-being. The field of emotional regulation research has produced fascinating insights that directly support Stoic practices. Dr. James Gross at Stanford University has demonstrated that people who can effectively manage their emotional responses show significantly better mental health outcomes, stronger relationships, and higher life satisfaction. His research identifies several key strategies for emotional regulation that mirror Stoic techniques almost exactly: cognitive reappraisal, reframing situations, acceptance, acknowledging emotions without being controlled by them, and response modulation, choosing actions despite feelings. Consider the neuroscience behind the Stoic practice of pausing before reacting. When you experience an emotional trigger, say, receiving harsh criticism from your boss, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, fires rapidly, flooding your system with stress hormones and preparing you for fight or flight responses. This happens in milliseconds before your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thinking, can fully engage. The Stoic pause creates crucial time for your prefrontal cortex to come online and evaluate the situation rationally. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research at UCLA shows that the simple act of naming emotions, what psychologists call affect labeling, actually reduces amygdala activation while increasing prefrontal cortex engagement. This mirrors the Stoic practice of observing and acknowledging emotions without being controlled by them. When Marcus, a financial advisor in Boston, learned to think, "I'm noticing anger arising," instead of, "I am angry," he was literally rewiring his brain to respond more rationally to challenging situations. The concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself throughout life, provides the scientific foundation for why Stoic practices become more effective with consistent application. Every time you practice cognitive reframing, emotional acceptance, or values-based decision-making, you strengthen the neural pathways that support these behaviors. Dr. Judson Brewer's research at Brown University demonstrates that mindfulness practices, which closely parallel Stoic attention training, create measurable changes in brain regions associated with self-awareness, emotional regulation, and stress reduction. Lisa, a marketing executive in Seattle, experienced this neuroplasticity firsthand. When I first started practicing Stoic techniques, pausing before reacting felt forced and artificial. But after 6 months of consistent practice, that pause became automatic. My brain literally learned to create space between triggers and responses. Brain imaging studies confirm that regular practitioners of mindfulness and emotional regulation techniques show increased gray matter density in areas associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation, while showing decreased density in the amygdala. Behavioral science research on habit formation provides additional validation for Stoic approaches to character development. Dr. Charles Duhigg's work on habit loops shows that sustainable behavioral change occurs through consistent practice of small, specific actions rather than relying on willpower or motivation. This aligns perfectly with the Stoic emphasis on daily practices and incremental character development. The Stoics understood intuitively what researchers now call implementation intentions, predeciding how you'll respond to specific situations. When Seneca practiced premeditatio malorum, imagining potential difficulties, he was essentially creating neural pathways that would activate during actual challenges. Modern research by Dr. Peter Gallwitzer shows that people who create specific, if-then plans for handling difficult situations are significantly more likely to respond effectively when those situations arise. Consider how this applies to workplace stress management. Research by Dr. Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School on psychological safety demonstrates that teams perform better when members feel safe to express concerns, make mistakes, and ask questions. This research validates the Stoic approach of responding to criticism and conflict with curiosity rather than defensiveness. When David, a project manager in Chicago, began treating workplace conflicts as opportunities for learning rather than threats to his ego, his team's performance improved measurably. The field of positive psychology, pioneered by Dr. Martin Seligman, has identified key factors that contribute to human flourishing: positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. Stoic practices directly enhance each of these elements. The Stoic focus on virtue and character development provides meaning and purpose. The emphasis on present moment awareness increases engagement. The practice of responding rationally rather than reactively improves relationships. The cultivation of gratitude and acceptance generates positive emotions. The consistent application of principles despite obstacles builds a sense of accomplishment. Perhaps most significantly, research on post-traumatic growth shows that people who develop greater resilience after facing adversity share characteristics that mirror Stoic virtues. They focus on what they can control, find meaning in their experiences, maintain perspective during difficulties, and use challenges as opportunities for personal development. This scientific validation doesn't diminish the wisdom of ancient Stoics. It confirms their remarkable insights into human psychology and provides additional motivation for consistent practice. Habit 9. The Daily Forge: 5 Essential Practices for Stoic Living. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., before the chaos of managing a busy emergency department in Phoenix, Dr. Maria Gonzalez sits quietly in her kitchen with a cup of coffee and her journal. This isn't leisure time, it's her daily forge, where she shapes her character and prepares her mind for whatever challenges the day might bring. "I used to think I didn't have time for morning reflection," she explains. "But I realized that taking 20 minutes to center myself saves me hours of stress and poor decisions throughout the day." This is the essence of Stoic daily practice. Consistent, intentional actions that gradually transform your default responses to life's inevitable pressures. The ancient Stoics understood that character isn't built through grand gestures or dramatic moments of inspiration, but through what they called ascesis, daily spiritual exercises that gradually reshape how you think, feel, and respond to the world. Marcus Aurelius didn't become a wise emperor through occasional philosophical insights, but through years of daily reflection, as evidenced by his personal journal that became the Meditations. These 5 essential practices form the foundation of modern Stoic living, each designed to strengthen specific aspects of emotional mastery and rational decision-making. The practice of mindful presence. The first essential practice involves cultivating what Epictetus called prosoche, continuous attention to the present moment. This isn't about emptying your mind or achieving some mystical state, but about developing the ability to notice your thoughts, emotions, and reactions as they arise. James, a software architect in Seattle, begins each day with 5 minutes of focused breathing, not to relax but to strengthen his awareness muscle. "I sit quietly and observe my thoughts without trying to change them," he explains. "This practice helps me recognize when I'm getting caught up in anxiety or frustration during the workday." This mindful presence extends beyond formal meditation into what the Stoics called the discipline of desire, paying attention to your wants, expectations, and attachments throughout the day. When you notice yourself getting frustrated because your commute is taking longer than expected, that's an opportunity to practice acceptance of what you cannot control while focusing on what you can, your response to the situation. The practice of reflective journaling. Seneca ended each day by examining his actions, decisions, and responses in what he called his daily audit. This wasn't self-criticism, but honest self-assessment aimed at continuous improvement. "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent," he wrote, "I examine the whole day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by." Modern practitioners adapt this ancient practice to fit contemporary life. Sarah, a marketing director in Austin, spends 10 minutes each evening writing about moments when she successfully applied Stoic principles and times when she fell short. "I don't judge myself harshly for mistakes," she notes. "Instead, I treat them as data points that help me understand my patterns and triggers. Her journal entries focus on specific questions. What situations triggered strong emotional responses today? How did I choose to respond? What would I do differently next time? What am I grateful for from today's experiences? The practice of mental rehearsal. The Stoics practice premeditatio malorum, not pessimistic worry, but strategic mental preparation for potential challenges. This involves spending a few minutes each morning visualizing how you'll apply Stoic principles to likely difficulties you might face. Marcus, a high school principal in Denver, uses his commute to mentally rehearse handling difficult conversations with parents, managing student disciplinary issues, and responding to unexpected crises with composure and wisdom. This mental rehearsal works because it preloads your brain with rational responses before emotional situations arise. When I've already imagined staying calm during a heated parent conference, Marcus explains, I'm much more likely to actually do it when the situation occurs. It's like having a mental script ready instead of improvising under pressure. The practice of values clarification. Each morning, effective Stoic practitioners identify which virtues they want to embody that day. The 4 cardinal Stoic virtues, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, provide a framework, but the practice involves making them specific and personal. Lisa, a financial advisor in Miami, begins each day by choosing one virtue to focus on. Today, I might focus on courage by having a difficult conversation I've been avoiding, or on justice by ensuring all my clients receive equal attention regardless of their account size. This isn't about perfection, but about intentional character development. By consciously choosing to embody specific virtues, you create what psychologists call implementation intentions, pre-made decisions about how you'll respond to various situations. When faced with a choice between personal comfort and doing the right thing, you've already decided to choose courage. The practice of gratitude and perspective. The final essential practice involves ending each day by acknowledging what went well and maintaining perspective on challenges. This isn't superficial positive thinking, but deep appreciation for what Marcus Aurelius called the gift of existence. David, a restaurant owner in Portland, concludes each day by identifying 3 specific things he's grateful for, ranging from major successes to small moments of connection with staff or customers. The Stoics understood that gratitude isn't just about feeling good. It's about maintaining accurate perspective on your life circumstances. When you regularly acknowledge what's working well, you're less likely to be overwhelmed by temporary setbacks or challenges. These 5 practices work synergistically to create what the Stoics called the fortress of the self, an inner stability that remains constant regardless of external circumstances. Habit 10. The evening reflection, mastering the art of self-examination. As the sun sets over the San Francisco Bay, tech executive Jonathan closes his laptop, dims the lights in his home office, and opens a leather-bound journal that has become his most valuable possession. This isn't a diary filled with daily events, but what he calls his character laboratory, a place where he conducts honest experiments in self-improvement guided by ancient Stoic wisdom. I used to think successful people were just naturally better at handling stress and making good decisions, he reflects. But I've learned that wisdom is built through deliberate practice, and the evening reflection is where that practice becomes most powerful. This final habit draws directly from Seneca's personal practice of daily self-examination, which he described in his letters. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, I examine the whole day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. For why should I fear any of my mistakes when I'm able to say, watch out that you don't do it again, but now I forgive you. This wasn't self-torture but self-cultivation, the systematic development of character through honest reflection and gentle correction. The evening reflection differs fundamentally from morning practices because it deals with actual experiences rather than intentions. While morning practices prepare your mind for challenges, evening reflection processes how you actually responded to those challenges. This creates a powerful feedback loop that accelerates character development and emotional mastery. The practice of emotional archaeology. The first component involves what we might call emotional archaeology, carefully examining the emotional experiences of your day to understand their origins and your responses. Dr. Lisa Chun, an emergency physician in Chicago, practices this by reviewing moments when she felt strong emotions during her shifts. I don't just ask what I felt, but why I felt it and how I chose to respond, she explains. Yesterday, I felt frustrated when a patient's family questioned my treatment decisions. Instead of just noting the frustration, I explored what triggered it. Was it concern for the patient, wounded professional pride, or something else entirely? This archaeological approach helps you identify patterns in your emotional responses. You might discover that you consistently react poorly to certain types of criticism, that specific situations trigger disproportionate anxiety, or that particular people bring out your worst tendencies. Marcus Aurelius engaged in this practice throughout his meditations, constantly examining his reactions to political pressures, military setbacks, and personal losses. The practice of decision audit. The second component involves systematically reviewing the decisions you made throughout the day, both large and small. This isn't about judging yourself harshly, but about understanding the reasoning behind your choices and evaluating their alignment with your values. Michael, a marketing director in Austin, reviews 3 categories of decisions each evening: professional choices, how he handled meetings, emails, and project priorities; interpersonal choices, how he responded to colleagues, clients, and family members; and personal choices, what he ate, how he spent his free time, how he managed his energy. The goal isn't perfection, Michael notes, but consciousness. I want to understand whether my decisions were driven by my values or by momentary impulses, whether they moved me toward or away from the person I want to become. This practice develops what philosophers call practical wisdom, the ability to make good decisions consistently across different contexts and circumstances. The practice of virtue assessment. The third component involves evaluating how well you embodied the 4 cardinal Stoic virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance in specific situations throughout the day. Sarah, a high school principal in Portland, uses this framework to assess her leadership decisions. When I had to discipline a student for cheating, I asked myself, did I respond with wisdom by understanding the full context? Did I act with justice by applying fair consequences? Did I show courage by addressing the issue directly rather than avoiding it? Did I demonstrate temperance by remaining calm and proportionate in my response? This virtue-based assessment helps you see character development as a practical, measurable process rather than an abstract ideal. Epictetus taught that virtue is the only true good because it's the only thing entirely within your control. By regularly assessing your virtue in action, you strengthen your commitment to character over circumstances. the practice of gratitude integration. The fourth component involves identifying specific moments of gratitude from your day, but with a Stoic twist, appreciating not just positive experiences, but also challenges that provided opportunities for growth. David, a restaurant owner in Miami, practices what he calls comprehensive gratitude, acknowledging both the smooth service periods that brought joy and the kitchen disasters that tested his patience and problem-solving skills. I'm grateful for the busy Friday night that went perfectly, but I'm also grateful for the night when everything went wrong because it showed me areas where we need to improve and gave me chances to practice staying calm under pressure, he explains. This approach transforms every experience into potential wisdom rather than dividing life into good and bad events. The practice of tomorrow's intention. The final component involves setting a specific intention for the following day based on insights gained from your reflection. This isn't about creating elaborate plans, but about identifying one area where you want to apply Stoic principles more effectively. The evening reflection thus becomes a bridge between today's lessons and tomorrow's opportunities for growth, creating continuous improvement in your character and decision-making abilities. Your Stoic journey, from ancient wisdom to modern mastery. Standing in your kitchen tomorrow morning, coffee in hand, you'll face the same choice that has confronted every human being throughout history. Will you be a passenger in your own life, swept along by whatever emotions and circumstances arise, or will you be the conscious architect of your responses, values, and character? The 10 habits we've explored together aren't just philosophical concepts. They're practical tools that have transformed the lives of emperors and slaves, CEOs and teachers, parents and professionals across 20 centuries of human experience. Marcus Aurelius, writing by candlelight after grueling days of military campaigns and political negotiations, reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This power hasn't diminished with time." In our age of social media anxiety, workplace stress, and constant connectivity, the need for inner mastery has only grown more urgent. The same principles that helped ancient Stoics navigate plagues, wars, and political upheavals can help you navigate traffic jams, difficult conversations, and career pressures with grace and wisdom. The journey from emotional reactivity to rational response isn't about perfection. It's about progress. Every time you pause before reacting in anger, every moment you choose curiosity over defensiveness, every decision you make based on your values rather than your impulses, you're building what the Stoics called the citadel of the self. This inner fortress becomes stronger with each conscious choice, more resilient with each challenge faced with wisdom rather than emotion. Remember that implementing these habits doesn't require dramatic life changes or hours of daily practice. Start small. Spend 5 minutes each morning setting your intention. Practice the strategic pause during one difficult conversation, or reflect on 3 decisions before bed. Sarah, the marketing executive we met earlier, began her Stoic journey with just one habit: pausing to take a conscious breath before responding to emails. 6 months later, colleagues were asking her secret to staying so composed under pressure. The ripple effects of your personal transformation extend far beyond your own well-being. When you respond to criticism with curiosity instead of defensiveness, you model emotional maturity for your colleagues. When you remain calm during family conflicts, you create space for genuine resolution rather than escalation. When you face setbacks with resilience rather than despair, you inspire others to find their own strength. Your commitment to rational living becomes a gift to everyone around you. These ancient practices aren't just about surviving modern life's challenges, they're about thriving through them, growing stronger with each obstacle, and discovering the profound satisfaction that comes from living according to your deepest values regardless of external circumstances. Your Stoic journey begins with your next choice. Will you let that difficult email trigger automatic frustration? Or will you pause and choose your response? Will you allow traffic delays to ruin your mood? Or will you use the time for reflection and gratitude? The power is entirely in your hands. If this exploration of Stoic wisdom has resonated with you, please subscribe to Stoic Vivu for more practical philosophy that transforms ancient insights into modern strength. Like this video if it's provided value, and share it with someone who could benefit from these timeless principles. Together, we're building a community committed to wisdom, resilience, and authentic human flourishing. Your journey to emotional mastery starts now.